interviewing the leading private equity executives and unlocking the secrets of success. Welcome to the Private Equity Podcast with Alex Rawlings.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Private Equity Podcast. Joining us today is Tim Flannery, Chief Executive and Co-founder of Passthrough. Welcome, and thank you very much for sharing your insights with us, Tim.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Tim, as is customary, if you could give us a 60 to 90 second breakdown of you, please.
Okay, cool. So background on me, I started my career at JP Morgan, spent 5 years there, left and raised a small venture fund, decided to go get my MBA. And then after my MBA, I took a job at a company called Carta that started off doing cap table management. And then my partners and I helped launch the investor services business while we were there. Did that for about 2.5 years. When I left, I was the head of go-to-market. And my partners had actually already started this company called Passthrough, and they invited me to join as a co-founder. Joined them about 2.5 years ago. And the idea with Passthrough is that we solve investor onboarding. And so basically, we onboarded hundreds and hundreds of fund managers for Carta's investor services offering. And that's how we got to know subscription documents and how broken they were. And that's how we got to know how broken the KYC, AML, and compliance processes as well. And so we got deeply familiar with this problem, and Passthrough is built to go solve this one very specific thing of investor onboarding. And we're doing that for hundreds and hundreds of firms today.
Okay. So no doubt the reason you founded Passthrough, but what's one mistake you see private equity, venture capital firms making, and what actions would you suggest to correct them?
So there's a broad trend of the relationships with LPs are changing. And so look, the economic relationship with investors always changes. It's always in flux. We just ran a survey of 101 fund managers, and we found out that, there's actually more pressure on GPs to offer concessions, to lower their fees, to whatever it is. And so today, fundraising is harder for those fund managers. But that's not the only place where LP relationships are changing. It's also changing in the composition of investors. So before, maybe I relied entirely on institutional, but I want to diversify my investor base. Half of all the fund managers we surveyed were looking to add more institutional or more family office or more retail. And so really this base of who's participating is really changing. And the retail piece is really interesting, especially there's this broad growth of retail over the last few years, and there's just more and more focus on it, be it from an emerging manager and venture to an Apollo, a Blackstone, a Macquarie, and everybody else. And I think what fund managers sometimes miss is, first of all, that the changing dynamics here forces them to maybe modernize the way that they've been treating their investors, but also to take a little bit more of a magnifying lens to what they're doing, not just on the digital experience for them, but also in their communications and brand strategy. Because everybody has very different ways that they like and need to communicate. It's kind of just customer service 101. And so on the LP experience digitally, think about all the different touch points that fund managers have with their investors. They need to go send out subscription documents and get them signed. They need to run them through KYC, AML. They need to have a repository of documents that they can access. They need to be able to share updates that are qualitative and quantitative on both portfolio companies and the performance of the fund itself. And so for the most part, people have been doing the same old stuff for the last couple of decades, and there hasn't really been much change. But the same level of sophistication that fund managers expect from their portfolio companies for how they treat their customers is the same level of sophistication that LPs are now beginning to expect from fund managers for how they treat them and their digital experiences as well. But it extends beyond the digital experiences too. It's also how I handle my communication and my brand strategies. And so for communication and brand strategies, it used to be that this was a very opaque world. Somebody gave you your distribution, somebody gave you some financials, and that was it. But there's more demand for investors than ever. And so when that's the case, you need to go meet your investors wherever they might be. And so what we've seen firms that are really doing a good job at differentiating is focus on actually having active communications. So by actively communicating with your investors, then that means that you can be prepared when something blows up. And how you actually handle things in those moments of crisis is pretty important. So in the regional banking crisis with Silicon Valley Bank and everything else earlier this year, one of the firms that we work with they had major exposure. Their portfolio had major exposure to Silicon Valley Bank. And so this unfolded over the course of a weekend. The easy thing to do would have been just wait and see to figure out what's happening. But they had hundreds of investors. And so they were able to quickly diagnose, to the extent that they were able to find out what was going on in their portfolio, what was going on within the fund itself and how it was doing cash management, what the possible impacts were, and everything else that they didn't know. And so that fund, from the managing partners to the investor relations team and everybody in between, spent all weekend calling people saying, here's what we know, here's what we don't know, here's when you can expect more updates. And you can bet that those LPs, by being treated as first-class citizens, that's how you earn a measure of trust and respect. And so it really happens at the most tactical level possible. There's another instance of a fund manager that we know who was going out and raising a new fund, and they were raising a new strategy. And part of it is because that's where they saw an opportunity in the market. Part of it was because it was on the demand of some set of their investors, but that actually created a conflict. And so recognizing that your investors are actually different, they all have different needs and desires. Their institutional investors were thrilled, but their family office investors were going to be upset because the reason they invested is because this firm had a very specific focus, and this helps deviate from that focus. And so, okay, that means that sometimes you got to pick up the phone, got to call people, you got to explain. Sometimes you got to go take your couple licks from them and move on. But because they're proactively doing this instead of surprising people, that's what sets apart them with their LPs, because you can bet with their LPs, they don't have that kind of relationship with all of their other investors. So being able to focus on actually what is proactive communication. And besides proactive communication, investment in brand. We're seeing fund managers that are really for the first time recognizing, okay, people are going to talk about me based upon what they read about me, what they see about me. It's not just going to be from speaking with me directly. In enterprise sales today, something like 80% of a decision has already been made prior to actually speaking with the sales team, because sophisticated buyers are doing their research before they talk to you. So are LPs. And so the fund managers who are actively going out and thinking about, how does the market perceive me? How can I share this thing of expertise that I've done? How do I get in front of them? They're going to be best positioned for how to, obviously this presumes good returns as well, but they're going to be the ones that are best positioned to pull together the source of capital that they want to build the kind of enduring firms that all of them want to go build. And I think that for the most part, people haven't really recognized that just the fundamental way that we interact with our investors is changing dramatically. And people will lead and they will reap the benefits. People will fast follow and people will fall behind. And for those that fall behind, for some of them, it doesn't matter because they've decided that they're going to have a very specific worldview of things that are going to work. But for a lot of firms, that's going to mean that eventually they're going to have difficulty raising that next fund.
Which we're seeing right now. We had a podcast recently, which will have gone out before this, with Matthew Garth, who talks about the amount of capital that's available versus the actual amount of capital that's being raised. There's a lot of capital sat in books at the moment and dry powder, as we refer to it as, but the amount of capital that private equity firms and venture capital firms will want to raise versus what they will get, what's available, we're 3 times out. He said like equivalent of 3 billion of capital and 1 billion available. So that's basically what we're looking at. So what you're obviously talking about here is that differentiation from a fundraising perspective of being different, looking different, and how you actually communicate with your existing investors, and where that works. But what do investors, because you've got an interesting insight, you see both sides of the table. What do investors want? What does, we talked about proactive, or you talked about proactive communication. You talked about that, instigating before they ask type scenario in essence. But what do they want to know? Because, picking up the phone and just having a chat with them probably would be valuable, but not every month because they're going to tell you to go away at some point. But what do they want to hear? What do they want to see? If I'm a PE/VC managing partner, what do I put as best practice to communicate with investors?
Well, I think the simple truth is there's no one thing that investors want. So that's really what it comes down to. Every different kind of investor has different reasons for investing in your fund. And yes, there's always going to be some financial component of it, but the reason that you have the reason that you have a sovereign wealth fund come in is going to be completely different than the reason that you have a university endowment come in. And so I think the first step is to actually recognize the heterogeneity of investors that you have. And so spend time actually understanding this. And this is something that you should be doing as a part of your fundraising process. And so, yes, they are going to underwrite you for your ability to find, select, win good deals, and then be able to go execute with those portfolio companies and achieve good returns. DPI is king right now. Everybody knows that. But but it extends beyond that too, because it's not just I've got this great return. Although, look, if your returns are good enough, that's going to be sufficient. But beyond that, how much do you really want to put all of your eggs in that basket? And so when you're going out, yes, you need to be convincing people, but fundraising is sales by another name. And the first thing that you need to do in sales and the first thing that you need to do in fundraising is understand, why are they even at the table? What are they hoping to learn? What are they hoping to get from this? And for some people, it's strategic. They want to go out, they want exposure to a certain industry, they want to be able to have access to your portfolio. For some people, it's about co-investment opportunities. For others, it's about, well, okay, like I just need to have broad index level exposure to an asset class. And for others, there's going to be a variety of different things. And so everybody's got very different things that they want to get from this. And so you need to tailor your communication strategies accordingly. There's no difference in building out a cap table for a private company or building out an investor base for your fund. You just need to have an understanding of what it is that your investors are looking for. And the only way that you can do that is by asking. Yes, you can have some assumptions about what an institutional investor wants. An institutional investor wants to be able to put a giant slug of money into your fund, and they want to be able to go and do this every time you're going out and raising, because they need to go put 5% of the pension or the endowment behind a single fund manager, or 1%, or whatever it might be. And so you need to be aware that that's what their goals are. You can have some assumptions, but you need to test them. You need to challenge them. And so I don't have a simple answer of like, what's the thing that LPs want? What LPs want is totally unique for all of them. And so the things that is standard is if you don't ask, you're not going to find out. And then when you do ask and you do find out, the way that you actually earn trust is by managing expectations for where you actually are, but then delivering on it consistently. And so it's something that's earned over time. You show it during the fundraising process, your responsiveness to emails, your responsiveness to due diligence requests. That is a tell for what people's experience is going to be like with you once they've actually decided to invest in your fund.
Sorry to interrupt here. Just a quick note to highlight our new sponsor, Grata. The private equity market is rapidly shifting to a data-driven, proprietary deal sourcing standard. Grata provides the window into over 7 million middle market private companies. Contact Grata so you can access the market first. Request a demo at www.grata.com. Now back to the podcast. And you talked about brand there, which is not something I hear spoken about enough in private equity. What's your interpretation of what needs to improve from a branding perspective from a PE and VC firm?
So everybody has some different version of this that they need to think through. Like if you're looking at emerging managers in venture, brand is how many followers do I have on Twitter? Can I actually get people to interact with me? Can I get people to respond with me? Can I, whatever it might be. And so that's a very specific application of, the brand of individuals associated with the firm is a really big deal. It's about what's going on with the promotion of these individuals. That's also true of like a Blackstone or Apollo too, but they're going to have more reticence about how do you actually promote people? How do you actually engage with all of these different things? First of all, because they're way more highly regulated. But second of all, what does the firm actually want to do? And so there's some element of, what are you as a firm conditioned to do? And so conditioning is like, what's in your DNA? What do you like to share? There's some elements of what's natural and what's unnatural and how much do you want to go push those boundaries? And then there's also some element of what's practical considering the way the world is. But how do you actually go build a brand? You build a brand by demonstrating that you're an expert in what it is that you do. And so there's a lot of ways that you can go do that. There's the very obvious, go speak at conferences, and you can also put together a podcast. You can put together thought leadership. You're involved in the conversation. When people are thinking about, here's a specific problem, you are part of the thing that they use to discover what the answer is. And so there's this association of competence with you. And there's a lot of different ways that you can build that confidence. Really, that just kind of depends on who you are as a firm. But that's like one element of it. Another element of it is, what does your website look like? What's your brand look like when people are actually engaging with you online, when they're researching you? How are you how can they learn about you? How are you showcasing what it is that you're doing? The brand in there's little difference in brand in private equity to brand in B2B. Like it's the same idea. It's the same kinds of investments that you need to go do.
Okay. So we talked a lot about fund, in essence, benefiting and driving that fundraising market. What are you seeing at the moment from a fundraising perspective? And you mentioned it earlier about that kind of level of oversaturation.
Yeah. So in that survey that I mentioned earlier, we found that 80% of the fund managers we surveyed thought the market was somewhere between somewhat challenging and very challenging. But kind of confusingly, about 80% of them also thought that they were going to be able to meet or exceed their fundraising targets. So there's something going on there that it's tough to disentangle whatever people's confidence levels are individually versus what they see in the market. But I think what it means, though, is people are pulling out all the stops. They're seeing that they're relying more on returning investors, but they're also spending more time going outbound. They are making fee concessions. They're dealing with more operational due diligence than they've ever had to before, and just kind of like data sharing. So I will say that for sophisticated LPs today, one thing that is kind of consistent, there's more data requests. They're everywhere. And so from their perspective, they think they're still going to be able to achieve their targets because they're doing anything and everything that they can, including looking for new sources of capital, engaging placement agents for the first time, or they're expanding their roster, revisiting their strategy. They're going to new locations. They're going to new geographies. And so that's kind of the major thing is there's no one thing, it's everything. And so every group is basically saying, what are all the different things that are available to me that I can go prioritize? And they're going out and doing it.
Okay, makes sense. And you've got an interesting insight because you've also this year raised obviously a Series A round. So congratulations. I think it was raised early or announced early this year in February. Can you tell us and share with us your kind of experience there, how you felt going out obviously to VC firms and pitching, etc., and just give us an insight into how that experience was for you in the business?
I was just talking with another founder this morning. He was asking for some advice about raising. What's interesting is the fundraising market when we first went out in the market in 2021 was very different from the market that we had when we raised our Series A, is even different from where it is today, just 6 months after. And so all of the advice that people have on it is very transitory. And so the experience of each of these is going to be different, but what people should actually do in a given environment is unique to the situation. The first time we went out and raised, so my co-founders had actually started Pass-Through about a year before I joined. And so all three of us had worked at Carta. All three of us had this experience of, this is a very annoying problem and we need to go solve it. And they started it. I joined and we decided to go out and raise. We started and then we were able to go close our round in just a couple of months. It was a very competitive process. We had a number of people that came to the finish line, and the expectations for what were required of us as a fund or us as a portfolio company are very different than the expectations for somebody to go out and raise that same round today in the seed market. And that was also reflected in the Series A. So first of all, the expectations of growth have changed and increased. If you're not growing, the market was tougher. So we've been growing. This is good for our business. Great, happy. That meant that we were able to go out and raise. But then there was a big question of who do you go raise from? How do you go do it? And so everybody today is looking at what do I do with my existing cap table, my internal partners versus adding people to it? How do you think about the trade-off between what does this mean for dilution, but what does it mean for also adding partners to the table? And how do you also think about the speed of it? So it took us just a couple of months the first time. It was a little bit of a longer process the second time. We had to spend a lot of time talking to people, meeting them, running through this longer process of educating them about the business and watching them see that progress over time. So they got to track us as a line of performance over the course of some time, as opposed to just like, here's my one experience talking to them, this dot instead. And so we were able to successfully go out and raise, but there was no ability to go push investors against each other. Like you lost some of the leverage that you might have had before. And instead, you just had to go out, show that you had a really good business, run a really diligent process, and be able to show people that you are, in fact, a good manager of that business, and then find terms that were favorable. And so luckily for us, we still ended up having a couple different offers on the table for when we got to the finish line. But we were able to take the partners that we'd worked with before, add some new people to the roster that we thought were going to be complementary to the business, and continue to grow it in the way that we wanted. What I'm seeing from a lot of other people today is they're making just a lot of concessions they didn't want to go make. And so some of that is in structure, some of it is in round size. The idea of what a proper valuation is finally returned to something that looks like normalcy. And so I'm actually really grateful that we didn't raise earlier than we did, because if we had, I think we frankly would have been caught with an overinflated valuation. And so great. Like from my perspective, it was a grind. Fundraising is a full-time job. I very much enjoy building the business rather than fundraising. I think this is probably true of fund managers that are doing the exact same thing. We would all rather be, the reason that we all start these companies, we start these firms, is because we want to go make good investments, or I want to go build the best way to go onboard an investor into any fund anywhere. And so fundraising, I'm happy that I was able to successfully put that behind us earlier this year.
What did you learn from that process, or looking back, what would you have done differently if you were raising now with the knowledge that you have?
I'm actually not sure that I would have done anything differently. So I think we ran the best process that we could have. There's always an element of how much you want to bring on new partners and what is bringing them to the boardroom mean in terms of like their influence on the business. We have a great partner. We have two great partners that are on the board today. And so very happy to have them help guide the business together with myself and my co-founders. The process, like originally when we went out, we had a sense that the markets were changing. We had a couple of conversations, and we had a choice of, did we want to go out and raise in what, at the time, if you talk to a number of investors, they said, this is the worst market ever. Why don't you just wait 9 months? Why don't you just wait a year and then go check? And I'm very happy we didn't take that advice, because the markets continued to tumble. And even though there's some steadying right now, I still think that it just would have introduced too much risk to the business. And so I was happy that we went out and we raised the amount that we did. That amount allows us to go build the business in the way that we want to go build the business, and did it, and didn't take the risk of trying to optimize for a better valuation or for better dilution or for better whatever. Just go out, raise the money, because the only thing that matters is you actually building a good business and having a good outcome. That's it.
Good advice. What do you love about the private equity venture capital industry, and what do you dislike about it?
So venture and private equity are both really interesting businesses. With venture, it allows companies like ours to be built, right? Like we have gone out, we've raised money, and the point of raising that money isn't to be profitable the moment we raise it. It's to go out and essentially have higher growth today to get better returns in the future. And so great, that's how a business like mine can be built. For private equity has been able to take distressed companies and turn them into productive companies, and all of the impact that can have on people's careers. And so in both cases, it's really transforming individual businesses. And so, my perspective on it is I like to build businesses rather than being the person who likes to build portfolios. I'm happy I'm on this side of the table. And in both cases, it's just, what kind of business do you want to build? And who's the partner that you want to have there? And so choosing a venture path, choosing a private equity path, choosing to bootstrap it, sure. But in both cases, that it just allows the kind of company development that really the founder of the executive team wants to go build. And so great. I'm grateful that in that kind of world, we're able to go do the things that we want to go do. One of the things that can be a little bit frustrating is there still can be a herd mentality. And I think maybe in venture, this is felt a little bit more of, well, today it's AI, it was crypto and everything else before that. And then it's, what is your strategy given this proliferation of this latest thing? And so that herd mentality can be a little frustrating. I think you see that in private equity too, but I think it's a little bit more tempered. And so I think there's fair questions to say, what does this mean for the impact of your business? But I think actually just watching out in practice, I'm happy for people to go build AI businesses, but I wish that there was a little bit more discipline about, is this actually going to be an enduring business? And so this isn't my, I think that AI is a failing experiment. I certainly don't believe that. The impact on our business has been fantastic. In fact, the impact that people have actually had in fundraising, fund managers with AI has been similarly interesting. But the way that people approach it from an investment perspective is a little puzzling to me.
How have you seen? I'm not going to let you get away without answering that. How have you seen people using AI for capital raise?
So I was surprised by this. I did not believe that we were going to see this, but around half of the fund managers we surveyed were using AI to write content for investors, to go through operational due diligence, to build pitch decks, to do other things. And so in each of those cases, about half the fund managers were doing it. When we talk to fund managers, it's a little bit less of AI is now central to our strategy than it is that AI is something that we're using to augment what we're doing, to experiment with. But I've talked to fund managers that have used it to find lookalike investors, to then figure out what's the message that these investors care about, and how can we actually go customize it according to that. And then what's the pitch deck look like? Well, I can automatically generate it, and then I can use it to create different versions. And there's no such thing as like a perfect end product here. I think that's become very apparent. The point of many of these tools today isn't, I think, to be here's a final polished finished product, but I think it's to have a partner, if you will, to quickly create and iterate upon these ideas that otherwise would just take you many, many hours. And so we're seeing that there's some leverage of it, but what actually is that leverage? How much does it actually get you? Does it help you save, a full-time hire one day or a couple full-time hires? Possible. That's probably not going to be transformative to the industry. But I think the thing that will be transformative to the industry is, okay, how can AI actually help me get better returns on my portfolio? Because the extra couple percent there, a couple percentage points gains in investment returns is going to be better than a couple headcount reduced in pick a different team. So that's one way. The other way that's going to be really interesting is if it actually does help me find and attract and win new sources of capital, and that's the other end of the game.
Interesting to see how things play out as we move forward and the technology develops. What are your influences, Tim? What do you watch? What do you read? What do you listen to? Do you reckon others should check out?
So one of the mentors that I have is a guy named Asuka Nakahara. Asuka was a leasing agent at Trammell Crow back in the 1980s. And he did that for 3 years and was promoted to partner. And then a number of years later was promoted to CFO and took Trammell Crow public in a very successful IPO. He then joined the Wharton School as a professor, and I ended up taking his class. And it was transformative for my career for a couple of reasons. One, because he is the one who put me into sales. When everybody I talked to and everybody I asked advice about what should I be doing about the couple career opportunities in front of me when I was graduating, he basically said, if you can learn how to go sell something, then you can do anything you want. And so without that encouragement, I actually think it would have been difficult for me to be the only person in my class of 900 people that took a sales job. The other thing that he did was he showed me that if I can't take a complex problem and break it down into a one-pager, then I clearly don't understand it. And so his class was a real estate development class, and I'm not a real estate investor. But one, I thought it'd be an interesting topic to learn. And two, I knew that he was one of the best professors at the Wharton School. And so from that, I was able to take these very complex topics that I didn't understand very well in the face of it and be able to try to turn it into a one-pager and then understand where my gaps were pretty quickly. And that's something that I've taken with me. And so he's been incredibly influential, of course, during my time at school, but even since then, he's served as a mentor and an advisor, and I'm thrilled to catch up with him whenever I can.
It's amazing how the people we come across can influence our lives and business, etc. So significantly. So, Tim, if anybody wants to reach out to you post this podcast, how best do they get in touch, please?
They can shoot me an email at tim@passthrough.com.
Excellent. We'll put that in the show notes. Well, Tim, thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate your insight. Leave us lots of interesting perspectives on capital raising, both from a Series A perspective and you doing that, but also from a private equity venture capital and some of the changes that they can be making and improvements for LP relations, etc. So thank you very much for joining us and giving us all your insight, Tim.
I appreciate very much having me on. And I know that for the video viewers, they're probably wondering about this wallpaper that's been behind me the entire time. I recently moved into the house. And so please excuse my wallpaper.
Somewhere quiet. Well, it's very, looks like a very peaceful place. It looks a bit like a forest. So for those on the podcast who are listening and not watching, to understand what's going on. And as always, for everybody listening, thank you very much for joining us. Should you ever need a new position within private equity or be looking for a new opportunity in a portfolio-backed or private equity-backed portfolio company, please do reach out to us at Raw Selection. But till the next time, keep smashing it, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Private Equity Podcast on www.raw-selection.com.